The night it happened, the air felt different. Too still, too quiet, like the world was holding its breath. You know that kind of silence, right? The kind that doesn't comfort you, it warns you. It's the silence that sneaks into your bones and whispers that something's about to break. He didn't know it yet, but that was the last night he would ever believe in forever. The house smelled of rain and burnt coffee. A clock ticked somewhere in the background. Steady, cruel, like it was keeping score of every second his life was about to change. He sat there at the edge of his bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the floorboards that had seen too much of his loneliness already. The glow from the streetlight cut through the blinds, striping his face in lines of pale gold and shadow. He wasn't crying. Not yet. He was too tired for that. It wasn't the kind of pain that burst out. It was the kind that sat heavy, deep inside, like a storm that forgot how to rain. He reached for his phone again, maybe for the 10th time that night, and stared at the last message on the screen. Just 6 words. "We need to talk. It's important." Nothing more. No call, no explanation. Just that. And the worst part? It wasn't from her. It was from him. Ethan. His best friend. His brother in everything but blood. You could spend a lifetime building trust. Years of shared laughter, inside jokes, scars from old fights that healed over time. And still, it only takes one sentence, one breath, to tear the whole thing apart. He'd always believed betrayal would look obvious. A slammed door, a screaming match, something loud and violent. But when it came, it wore a quiet face, a simple message that landed like a knife between his ribs. Outside, thunder rolled across the horizon, low and distant. Somewhere in the city, people were probably laughing, falling in love, making plans for tomorrow. And he sat there, realizing tomorrow might not exist the same way anymore. He opened the window. The wind carried the smell of wet asphalt and jasmine from the neighbor's garden. For a moment, he thought about all the nights Clara used to leave that window open, said she liked how the night air smelled after rain. He used to tease her about it. Now that scent just hurt. He closed his eyes and saw her smile. The real one, not the polite, distant one she'd worn for the past few months. He remembered how it used to reach her eyes, how it used to make him feel seen, wanted. That was before the silence started growing between them, before conversations became nods and smiles became walls. He'd noticed the change, he just didn't want to admit it. Because admitting it meant facing the truth that the woman he loved had been slipping away right in front of him, and maybe, just maybe, she wasn't falling into emptiness. Maybe she was falling into someone else. The phone buzzed again. He didn't move. When he finally picked it up, the message was shorter this time. "You deserve to hear it from me." He stared at those words until they blurred. He knew what they meant. Not because they said it, but because they didn't have to. That's how betrayal feels. It doesn't shout. It whispers. It speaks in what's not said. He leaned back against the headboard, eyes unfocused, heartbeat loud enough to drown out the rain. His throat tightened. He wasn't angry, not yet. He was suspended in that in-between place where disbelief and pain overlap. The place where your body knows the truth, but your heart is still fighting for a lie. Lightning flashed outside, painting the room in harsh white light. For 1 second, he saw his reflection in the mirror, a man unrecognizable to himself. Not broken yet, but close. The kind of close that hurts to breathe. He whispered her name once, softly. Not as a plea, but as a farewell he wasn't ready to give. The memories came like waves. Their first kiss under a flickering street lamp. The night she told him she wanted to grow old with him. The way she laughed when she tripped over his shoes. Every moment, small, ordinary, now carried a hidden fracture he had noticed before. And in every memory, there was Ethan, smiling in the background, always there. How did he miss that? How do you miss something like that? Maybe because love blinds you, not to what's bad, but to what's possible. Because the mind can't accept that the people you die for might already be killing something inside you. He stood up, pacing the floor, trying to breathe through the weight pressing down on his chest. The rain outside got heavier, drumming against the glass like an impatient truth demanding to be let in. He picked up his jacket, half thinking he'd go find her, ask her why, ask him how, ask the world when everything started falling apart. But deep down, he already knew the answers. He just wasn't ready to say them out loud. Because once you name a betrayal, you can't take it back. You can't unknow it. He dropped the jacket, sat back down, and stared at the dark screen of his phone, at his own reflection in the glass. And then he said it, barely a whisper. She married him, didn't she? That's when the first tear came. Not loud, not dramatic, just a single tear down the cheek of a man who finally realized he'd been replaced before the goodbye even came. The rain softened, almost gentle now, like the world felt sorry for him. He laughed once, a quiet, hollow sound, the kind of laugh you give when you've run out of things to break. And then he looked straight into that reflection, eyes red, face pale, breath trembling, and said, "All right then, let's hear the truth." He sat there for a long time, staring into the dim reflection of his own eyes. The question still echoed in the back of his mind, quieter now, but heavier somehow. She married him, didn't she? The words didn't feel real. They felt borrowed, like they belonged to someone else's tragedy. But the body knows before the mind does. His chest had already sunk, his stomach already twisted. That's how truth feels when it's finally done hiding. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees again, rubbing his palms together as if friction could warm something inside him. The house around him was too still. No television hum, no creak of movement upstairs, just rain and the faint hiss of air through the vent. The kind of silence that makes you hear your own heartbeat. That was the thing about Heartbreak. It made even familiar spaces feel haunted. The walls still held her laughter, her voice, the rhythm of footsteps that no longer belonged to this house. It wasn't just her absence that hurt, it was the ghost of her presence that refused to leave. He closed his eyes, trying to remember the beginning, because beginnings always felt safer than endings. They met at a friend's birthday, nothing grand, just a backyard gathering lit by fairy lights and bad music. She'd laughed at his terrible joke, the kind of laugh that didn't sound forced. That laugh had hooked him. It sounded like freedom, like something he didn't know he was missing until he heard it. He remembered how she looked that night, not perfect, not dressed up, just real. Hair pulled back, face open, eyes too honest for someone who would one day lie so completely. She'd asked what he did for a living. He said he was still figuring it out. She smiled and said, "Good. People who've already figured it out are boring." That line lived rent-free in his head for years. Ethan had been there too. He remembered introducing them. A quick handshake, a polite smile, no spark, no sign, nothing that could have warned him. He could still see Ethan that night, confident, steady, the kind of man who always had the right words. They'd been best friends since they were kids. They'd seen each other's worst days, celebrated the best ones. There wasn't a single version of his life that didn't have Ethan in it. When Clara came into the picture, Ethan was the first person he told. He said, "She's different, man. She listens." Ethan had smiled, clapped him on the back, and said, "Then don't screw it up." Funny thing, he never did. Someone else did that for him. He opened his eyes now, the memory stinging. The rain had slowed, reduced to soft drips against the glass. A car passed outside, its tires whispering over wet asphalt, and then silence again. He stood up, walking into the kitchen. The floor was cold under his feet. There was still a mug on the counter. Her mug. Pale blue, small chip on the handle. He'd never thrown it away. Every time he thought about it, something in him said, "Not yet." He poured water into it out of habit, then stopped halfway. The sound of it hitting ceramic was too loud. He set it down, staring at the steam. There had been signs, small, forgettable ones that didn't make sense until now. The days she came home smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't his, the laughter that didn't include him anymore, the way she'd defend Ethan when he wasn't even being accused of anything. He remembered once, months before she left, he walked in on a quiet conversation between them. Nothing inappropriate, just too intimate in its silence. They stopped talking the second he entered, like the room itself had changed temperature. He hadn't asked questions. Love made him generous with excuses. He turned off the light, the kitchen sinking back into half-darkness. His reflection lingered faintly in the window. Tired eyes, unshaven jaw, the look of someone who'd aged years in a single night. He whispered, mostly to himself, "I gave them both everything." It wasn't anger, not really. It was confusion, a kind of ache that didn't know where to go. How do you hate the people who once felt like home? How do you bury memories that still breathe inside you? He walked back to the living room, picked up his phone again, and scrolled aimlessly. Every photo felt like evidence now. 2 smiling faces, his arm around them, Ethan standing beside them. They looked like a promise frozen in time, and all he could see now was the irony. He wanted to delete them. He couldn't. He wanted to forget. He wouldn't. So he did the only thing left to do. He sat back down, opened a blank note on his phone, and started to write. "My name is Daniel, and this is the story of how I lost the 2 people I trusted most." His fingers paused over the keys. Not in one day, not in one fight, but slowly, like watching a candle burn down to nothing while pretending it still gives light. He exhaled. There it was, the truth finally finding a voice. This was no longer about revenge or closure. It was about understanding, because the only way to stop reliving a story is to tell it out loud. And as he began to type, the first real tear in hours slipped down his cheek. Not out of weakness, but release. For the first time since it all fell apart, Daniel wasn't just the man who'd been betrayed. He was the man who'd finally decided to remember everything. He remembers the first year as golden, not perfect, just alive. Every day felt like a story worth keeping. There were mornings filled with burnt toast and laughter echoing down a hallway that smelled like fresh paint. Nights spent planning tomorrows they never questioned. That was before life got heavier. Before small things started to change in ways that didn't make noise, but left bruises anyway. He can still see it clearly. One Saturday morning, sunlight slipping through half-open curtains, Clara humming in the kitchen. He'd been fixing the cabinet hinge, swearing under his breath at the screwdriver that wouldn't fit. She'd leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, smiling that easy smile. You'd think a man who builds things for a living could fix one door. He'd laughed, tossed her a look, said, "And you'd think a woman who breaks everything she touches might help once in a while." It had been playful then, real, the kind of teasing that says, "I see you." If someone had told him then that one day those same smiles would belong to someone else, he wouldn't have believed it. Back then, Ethan was everywhere too. He'd drop by unannounced, carrying takeout and cheap beer, joking that married people shouldn't be allowed to eat leftovers. Daniel never minded. Ethan had always been part of their circle. It felt normal. Safe. He remembers one night. A thunderstorm had rolled in, power flickering. They'd lit candles, the 3 of them sitting around the living room, trading old stories. Clara had asked Ethan, "Do you ever wish you'd settled down?" Ethan had shrugged, smiling in that careless way of his. "Maybe someday, but not until I find someone who looks at me the way you look at him." She'd blushed. Daniel had laughed it off. But later that night, when he replayed the moment in his head, something about her silence after that answer had lodged itself deep. He told himself it was nothing, just words. Months later, the laughter in the house started to fade. He blamed work, she blamed exhaustion. Neither of them said what they really felt, that the air between them had thickened into something they couldn't breathe through. He remembers coming home late one evening, laptop bag cutting into his shoulder, the smell of rain clinging to his coat. Clara was in the living room, phone in hand, her face caught in the light of the screen. When she noticed him, she jumped slightly, locking the phone before smiling too quickly. "Hey, you're home early." "Early? It's almost 9. "Oh, I lost track of time." She set the phone down face down. He'd noticed the small tremor in her hand, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. He wanted to ask who she'd been talking to. He didn't, because love makes you polite with pain. A week later, Ethan stopped by. Same grin, same easy charm. He asked about work, about life, about everything except Clara. Still, Daniel could feel something different, the way Ethan's eyes flicked toward the kitchen when she spoke, how Clara's laughter came too quickly, too light. He tried to ignore it, tried to convince himself that he was imagining patterns that weren't there. But truth has a way of sharpening itself against denial. There was another evening, an anniversary dinner that never happened. He'd planned it for weeks, booked the restaurant where they'd first met, bought flowers, a card with words he still believed in. She'd called half an hour before he was supposed to pick her up. "I can't make it tonight, something came up." Something. The word felt too small to cancel a memory. When she got home later, her hair smelled faintly of a cologne he didn't own. He never asked. He just watched her move around the house like a ghost wearing her own skin, saying the right things with the wrong eyes. The breaking point didn't arrive with shouting. It came in quiet pieces. Missed calls, half-truths, nights spent on opposite sides of the bed pretending to sleep. He remembers waking up once to the sound of her whispering, too soft to make out, too familiar to be random. He'd turned, eyes half open, and seen the faint glow of her phone lighting her face. In that moment, he'd felt something close to grief even before he knew what he was losing. He remembers whispering to the dark, "Please, not him." But the silence that followed was louder than any answer. Now, thinking back, he sees all the invisible moments where the ground began to crack. Ethan's sudden absences that matched Clara's vague explanations. The shift in her tone whenever his name came up. The way she started dressing like someone who needed to be noticed again. He'd told himself she just wanted change, that maybe they both did. But love isn't built to survive in rooms full of half-spoken truths. It dies quietly. One excuse, one missing glance, one unanswered question at a time. And sitting there now, in that same house stripped of laughter, he can finally admit what he wouldn't before. The story didn't end when she left. It began the first moment he stopped being enough.
The night the truth came to him wasn't special. It didn't announce itself with thunder or some grand sign. It arrived like a whisper, a quiet click of realization that changed the air in the room. He was cleaning his inbox. That was all. A normal night, a normal task. Work emails, bills, a message from Ethan, buried weeks deep, unread. The subject line was nothing suspicious, just, "Need your opinion." He opened it without thinking. Attached was a photo, a venue booking confirmation. He almost closed it, assuming it was for some project, but then his eyes caught the names printed neatly at the top. Ethan Carter and Clara Hayes. Wedding reservation. His stomach tightened. The air left his lungs in a slow, unsteady exhale. He read it again. Once. Twice. He blinked, waiting for the mistake to correct itself, for reality to rearrange into something that made sense. But the words didn't move. They just stared back at him, unblinking, final. He clicked the message open, scrolling through the details. Date, location, even the floral arrangement. His name wasn't anywhere. The first sound that came out of him wasn't a cry. It was a laugh. Small, broken, a sound made by someone whose body hadn't caught up to his mind. He stood there, phone in hand, heart pounding hard enough to echo in his ears. The kitchen light hummed above him, flickering faintly, and for a moment the world tilted. That was when he realized this wasn't new. This had been building, growing quietly under the skin of their lives, waiting for him to look close enough. He remembered every lie she'd told, every half smile, every "I'm tired," that now translated to "I'm with him." He pressed a hand to his chest, feeling the hollow there, the space where her voice used to live. And then came the anger. Not loud, not destructive. It was cold, precise. The kind that makes your hands steady when they should be shaking. He scrolled further down and saw a note attached to the booking. It was written by Ethan. She wants something simple, something real. Simple. Real. He closed his eyes. For years, he had given her real. The long nights, the shared struggles. The love that stayed even when it wasn't easy. And now those same words were being used by the man who'd stood beside him through everything. He thought about calling Ethan, thought about driving over. But what would he say? What words could survive this kind of silence? So instead, he sat and listened to the hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the ceiling fan. Every ordinary sound, suddenly unbearable. When he finally picked up his phone, his fingers moved without command. He typed out a message. I saw the email. Then deleted it. He typed again. You could have told me. Deleted that too. He stared at the blank message box for a long time, until the screen dimmed, and then he whispered to the darkness, You were supposed to be my brother. The words left his mouth, and with them, something else left too. The last piece of denial. He stood, walked to the window, looked out at the city lights stretching endlessly. Somewhere out there, they were together. Maybe laughing, maybe planning their vows. He wondered if she ever thought about him when she said yes, if her heart hesitated even for a second before choosing the man who once toasted to their happiness. He wanted to hate her. He wanted to hate him. But hate felt too easy for what this was. This wasn't rage. It was mourning. He was grieving two people who were still alive. The days after blurred together. Quiet, sleepless, heavy. He didn't tell anyone. Didn't show up to work. The house became a museum of their shared life, untouched, frozen. Her mug, still on the counter. Her book, still open to the same page. Every object felt like an accusation. He started writing again. Not to them, but for himself. Notes, fragments, unfinished letters. A way to pull the poison out without naming it. You said you wanted truth, he wrote one night. So here it is. I would have forgiven you, both of you, if you'd just been brave enough to tell me.
He paused, reread the words, and felt the sting of their honesty. Forgiveness. That was the cruelest part, knowing he still had it in him. One evening, he checked Ethan's social media. It wasn't curiosity. It was confirmation. There it was. The photo. Ethan in a suit. Clara in white. Her hand in his. He zoomed in, his vision blurring with tears he refused to wipe away. Her smile was real. Not forced. Not guilty. Just happy. He whispered, "I hope it was worth everything." And then he closed the screen. For good this time. He sat there in the dark, the glow from the phone fading out, and let the silence return. Heavier, colder.
Three months had passed, though time no longer moved the same way. It didn't flow. It dragged. It circled. It doubled back on itself. The house had changed. Not in ways anyone else would notice, but Daniel did. The framed photo on the mantel was gone. The couch had been turned to face the window instead of the TV. The air smelled of cedar and paper instead of her perfume. He'd built new silence here, one that didn't ache as much as it used to. He'd gone back to work, too, quietly, without announcement. People had stopped asking about Clara after the first few weeks. They meant well, they always do, but pity wears a face that's hard to look at for too long. Now, mornings started with coffee and long walks. No music, no phone. just the crunch of gravel under his boots and the sound of his own breath. He'd grown to like it, the stillness. It didn't judge him. The world had carried on, as it always does. He'd seen their wedding photos online once, not because he wanted to, but because the algorithm decided he should. He'd scrolled past without stopping. The ache didn't hit like before. It was still there, yes, but duller, like a scar that only hurts when it rains. Then came that afternoon, the one that would test how far he'd really come. He was at a small cafe downtown, a place he'd found months after everything ended. It wasn't special, but it was safe. He liked the smell of roasted beans and old wood, the sound of soft chatter around him. He sat by the window, sketching in a small notebook. He wasn't an artist, but drawing helped him think, helped him breathe. That was when he heard the laughter. Light. Familiar. He froze, turned, and there she was. Clara, standing a few feet away, sunlight falling across her like some cruel spotlight. Her hair shorter now, her clothes brighter, her smile still too warm for the weather. She wasn't alone. Ethan stood beside her, hand resting lightly at her back. The gesture small, protective, the kind that used to be his without thinking. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. The cafe noise faded, the air tightened. Then she saw him. Her smile faltered, just slightly, a half-second crack before she caught herself. Ethan followed her gaze, and when their eyes met, Daniel didn't flinch. He just nodded. Small, calm. A man greeting a stranger he used to know. Ethan's face twitched. Guilt? Surprise? Maybe both. Clara said something under her breath. He couldn't hear what. They didn't come over. Didn't have to. The distance between them said everything words couldn't. Daniel turned back to his notebook, drew a line that meant nothing, then another. His heartbeat steadied, slow and deliberate. He didn't leave. He didn't need to. When he finally looked up again, they were gone. Only the empty table remained. He sat there for a long moment, breathing in the quiet that followed, and for the first time he realized he wasn't shaking. That was how healing really looked. Not fireworks, not closure speeches, just control, reclaimed, quietly like steadying your own hands. Later that evening, he stopped by the bookstore next door. The clerk, a woman with kind eyes, smiled at him as he walked in. "You look like someone who needs a good story." He smiled back, a real one this time. "Maybe I do." He left with a novel about rebuilding, not romance, not revenge, just a man learning to live again after everything fell apart. That night, at home, he made dinner for one and left the TV off. He opened the book but didn't read much. Instead, he found himself thinking about that cafe, about Clara's face, about how for the first time, seeing her didn't feel like bleeding. He whispered to the empty room, "You can go now." Not to her. To the version of himself that had been waiting for an apology that would never come. The silence that answered him this time was different. Not heavy, not hollow, just his. He leaned back in his chair, letting the quiet settle around him like a blanket. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, all those small, ordinary sounds that once mocked him, now felt like proof. He was still here, still breathing, still Daniel. And maybe that was enough.
There's a kind of peace that doesn't look like peace at first. It doesn't come wrapped in forgiveness or neat little lessons about letting go. It arrives quietly, on a random morning, when you realize the weight you've been carrying doesn't feel as heavy anymore. That was how it came for Daniel. Not in a moment of clarity, but in 1,000 small choices that built themselves into a life again. He started running, not to chase something, but to move, to feel his own pulse, his own rhythm. He started cooking real meals, not the kind you make to fill silence, but the kind that remind you you're still worth the effort. He even laughed sometimes, really laughed. Not at jokes, but at the absurdity of it all. How life can tear you down to splinters and still expect you to wake up the next day and show up for it. And he did, every single day. People still mentioned Clara sometimes. Not cruelly, just casually, the way people talk about old friends or faded headlines. He didn't flinch anymore. The name no longer had claws. It was just a name. Ethan's too. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant remembering without reopening the wound. He'd learned that the hard way. Some evenings, when the city quieted and the last light faded, Daniel would stand by the window and watch the world go dim. He didn't wonder where she was anymore, didn't replay what went wrong. Instead, he'd catch his reflection in the glass. Tired eyes, a few new lines at the corners, but steadier somehow. That was the face of someone who survived. He'd whisper, not out loud, but somewhere deep inside, "You're still here." And that meant everything. He never sent the letters he'd written, the ones filled with words he'd never said when it mattered. He kept them folded in a box at the back of his desk, not as reminders of pain, but as proof that he'd felt something real once, that he had loved fully, even if it broke him. Because heartbreak doesn't mean you were foolish. It means you were brave enough to care. The last time he passed that cafe, the same one where he'd seen them, the barista called out, "You want your usual?" He smiled. "Yeah, the usual's good." He sat at his old table by the window, the one with the crack running through the corner. The world outside moved as it always did. Cars, strangers, the slow drift of light across glass. He realized he wasn't waiting anymore. Not for closure, not for explanation, not even for healing. He'd already built something better. Peace. It didn't roar. It didn't announce itself. It was in every deep breath, every unshaken moment, every time he chose not to look back. And maybe that's what real strength is. Not revenge, not pretending it didn't hurt, but learning how to live again without needing to erase the story that broke you. He finished his coffee, left a few bills on the table, and stepped outside. The air was warm. A breeze caught his sleeve. He tilted his head toward the sun, eyes half closed, letting it touch his face. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a man who'd lost something. He felt like someone who'd returned to himself. And as he walked away, the narrator's voice might have said, "Sometimes the people who break you are the ones who hand you back your power without ever knowing it. Sometimes the ending you feared becomes the beginning you needed. And sometimes the quietest victory is simply becoming someone you can finally be proud of." Daniel didn't look back. He didn't have to. The past was behind him, exactly where it belonged. And ahead, wide open, waiting, was the rest of his life.
You know, sometimes we spend so much time asking why they did it that we forget to ask what it taught us. Maybe that's the real confession hiding inside every broken story. Not the pain, not the betrayal, but the truth that even when someone takes everything from you, you still get to decide who you become after. If this story found a quiet place inside you, if you've ever had to rebuild yourself from pieces you didn't break, then you already understand Daniel's silence. Because healing doesn't always look like forgiveness. Sometimes it's just breathing without flinching. Sometimes it's walking past what hurt you and not feeling the need to look back. Here, in this space, we tell the stories people are too afraid to say out loud. Not for pity, not for revenge, but because somewhere, someone needs to know that they're not the only one who made it through the fire. So if you're still listening, stay. Subscribe to Uncut Confessions, because here, we don't run from the truth. We face it, we name it, and somehow we learn how to live again. This was Daniel's confession. Maybe next time, it'll be yours.